Tom Harmer, your town manager. Today, I'm here on the eastern side of Greer Island, right by Longboat Pass. And the town recently had some work done here at the edge of Greer Island. We're going to talk about that and a couple of other projects that are in the works for this area. Joining me today is Isaac Brownman. Isaac is the town's public works director, and his department oversees all the work out here. Good morning.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
Great to see you out here.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah, it's good to run across you out here on Greer Island today.
Thank you.
And so I know in the last few days, the contractor just completed some work out here. Can you explain for our viewers what they've been doing out here?
Certainly. So we hired a contractor to excavate this channel. Basically what had happened is sand had migrated from the west side of the bridge around the corner to the east side of the bridge, and essentially has blocked the channel that would allow residents and others to get to that back canal and lagoon area to the south there. And in addition to that, the sand had migrated so close to that dock, it had become both a hazard and a nuisance for the property owners there. So the town hired a contractor to excavate a lot of the material, about 1,500 cubic yards of sand, which is beach compatible sand, and place it in this mound here temporarily. And in the future, we'll be relocating the sand back to the Gulf side. Just so you're aware, Tom, where we're standing, about 15 years ago, this didn't even exist. This sand has migrated here over time. Greer Island actually stopped west of the bridge, so we're just trying to return some of the sand back to where it came from on our Gulf front beaches of Longboat Key.
So it's really interesting when you look at those historical documents, because Greer Island really isn't an island. You know, it's a peninsula.
Correct.
At some point it was, and as I understand it, a pass went actually through it between the island and the mainland of Longboat Key. But over the years, due to beach nourishment efforts and sand flow, it's kind of connected to the mainland, and now it's kind of worked its way around under the bridge and out towards the bay.
That's correct. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. And so this sand, as you mentioned, is here temporarily. We have a couple of other things going on. The one that the commission spent a lot of time on recently was a new ordinance that designates this area as kind of a bathing zone. Can you talk about next steps with that to implement the new ordinance?
Yes. So some of the steps that need to take place with establishing a zone in the waters, you have to get permits from the state and actually from the federal government through U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So we're in process with all of that. The primary permitting agency is the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, and they regulate what kind of restrictions happen in the water. So we're in progress with that at this time, and essentially we'll be putting buoys out here and signs that talk about that this is not an area for motorized vessels. We'll also be putting up signs just to encourage people to be careful when they're out here in this area, if they're going to be wading or swimming in this area, and we'll be establishing that as soon as we get those permits in hand.
And it's interesting, I didn't realize this myself, but even placing the signs related to that area that's being designated requires the FWC approval. It's something the town just can't put in by themselves.
That's correct. If we put any landward signs that talk about restricting boater access or any type of restriction, that's also governed by Florida Fish and Wildlife, and that was something new we discovered as well.
And so as part of the ordinance here, as I understand it, there's really three different areas designated. One is a navigation area, which our Marine Patrol and the police department can enforce now, which makes sure that no boats or anyone else excludes access to the canal area. We call it Canal 1A, but there are property owners back there who have docks and they need to have access to the property. And so that navigational area will be maintained and enforced by the town.
Yes.
And then on both sides of that, as you go around the corner, around by the bridge, there's this bathing area that will prohibit motorized vehicles from entering that area to protect the public and make it safer. And then the same thing occurs here with a stretch of the sand. The result of that, as I understand it, will then allow kayakers and paddleboarders to then access this beach area. The buoys will designate the area that motorboats would not then beach on the Greer Island portion.
That's correct. Essentially, all those buoys and all that effort will create this as a non-motorized vessel zone, a motorized vessel exclusion zone.
And it's only a portion of the spit. We call this sometimes the Greer Island spit.
Yes.
But it's not the entire spit, is that correct?
That's correct. It'll extend from a point a little bit northward of the dock, about 180 feet to the north, and then that zone will conclude. And then there is actually no restriction beyond that as you head west under the bridge.
Okay, so boats will still be able to pull up on a portion of the spit here,
yes,
and then as they have in the other areas.
That's correct, yes.
And so over the next, is that weeks for that to be installed? So, you know, we're talking, you know, middle of July now. Do you think that'll be in place here by the end of July or when?
We hope so. It all depends on how quickly the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission will get us our amended permit. Now that we've done the construction work, we had to resubmit a permit that shows the new shoreline and also permit the signs that we wanted to put on the land. It all depends on that process. We're hopeful it'll be very soon, and from there, Public Works will hire a vendor to install the marine buoys, and then our staff will install the landside signs. So as soon as possible.
Well, and I appreciate it's been kind of a team effort. Our Planning, Zoning, Building Department, Alan Parsons has been involved. Our police chief, George Turner's been involved. You've been working the construction side here and the implementation of the buoys and the signs. But it really is a joint effort, and there's work now underway to educate the public about the changes with the new ordinance. The beach volunteers have been notified, rental boat companies have been notified, and we're trying to let the boating community know of these changes.
Yes, yep, exactly. Yeah. It's important to let everybody know because it has been historically a recreational area for motorized vessels, but it'll be somewhat limited. There will still be an area that can be used, but this area will be restricted.
Yeah. And so I think you've referred to before, but all this sand here, where did it come from?
So what we believe most of this, where we believe most of the sand came from was nourishment projects, beach nourishment projects that occurred west of the bridge over time. The town would have a nourishment project that would deposit a fair amount of volume of sand on the west side of the bridge, and then pre-town, even the Army Corps had done some deposits on the west side of the bridge. And over time, the way the currents and the dynamics work on this part of the island, a lot of this material would either wash into the pass and we could dredge it back out, but some of that material would actually wrap around and deposit here where the velocities are slower and the currents are slower. And as you slow down, the sand would just deposit here. What we're in progress with right now is a permit for a management plan so that the town can come in and re-dredge this material and place it back on the Gulf front where it came from, and do that as we need to do it. Do that as many times as we need to do it, with whatever frequency we believe we need to do it. And we have actually obtained the permits to do that. We're in final design as we speak.
Okay, so that's kind of the third thing that's going on. The first was the emergency dredge because some of the immediate concerns of shutting off access to the canal, the closeness to the dock, the zone area to kind of protect and create a safe area for the boaters, for the bathers, for the paddleboarders, for the kayakers, and then this longer term project you just talked about, which is really the management plan, so that you don't have to do this all the time. You don't have to do another emergency dredge. And so how soon do you think that first work will occur?
We're hopeful by the time we get our construction documents complete and bidding and get the contractor on board, we're targeting before the end of this calendar year to have all this sand, a lot of this sand removed from here. Now, we are limited as to how much we can take out of here due to state and federal permitting. Once this sand migrated over here, started to grow mangroves and other ecologically important habitat, so the permitting agencies look at it as it has grown in, and we have to work within those constraints. In addition, the Florida Department of Transportation owns this bridge and is only allowing us to get within about 25 feet of either side of the bridge. So we're working within those constraints to collect all the sand as much as possible, as much of the sand as possible, and deposit it back on the Gulf facing front. A lot of this mound you see here will be part of that.
Okay, and there's also sand on the other side of the bridge that you're going to take and bring around to the beach as well.
That's right, correct.
Yeah, how far back will that go from where it's at today?
I don't have an exact number, but we've been basing that location where we start back in how this island exists, or this area existed back in 2006. That'll be our starting point. It'll be the location that existed back in 2006, and we have aerial photographs to identify that location.
So it will pretty significantly change this portion of Greer Island.
Yes.
And then create, as you mentioned, almost that recurring, not automatic, but recurring dredging over time as the sand comes through and builds up, taking it back around to the beach.
Yes. Ideally, we would time that effort with our future beach nourishment cycles. We do our beach nourishment cycles every 6 to 8 years, and as part of that, we would want to use this as a sand source.
Okay, and I know last year your department oversaw the project to install the new groins in the area.
Yes.
And so those groins help with some of the sand migration as well.
Yes, it does. Yes, they do. All of the sand that's south of those structures seems to be doing well, holding in place. By permit, we were required to put some sand north of the last structure, and a lot of this material is what's migrated from that effort.
Okay, and you have to maintain that around the groins. There's a certain permit
to an extent.
requirement.
Yes, sir, to an extent.
Yeah. So it's really a systematic approach. Those 5 groins, especially the 3 on the north end, help contain the sand that comes around, helps maintain the beach in that area, helps protect the north end of the island, but also minimizes this area from growing. And then you now have this permit which will allow you to take this and circle that sand back around periodically.
That's correct, yes.
All right, well, very good. Is there anything else you think our residents should know about the projects that are going on here on Greer Island?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay, all right, good. Well, thank you for joining me today, and thank you to our viewers for joining us today to learn a little bit more about the projects that are going on here on Greer Island.